Just before we get into today's video, I do want to give a shout out to our amazing sponsor today, and that is Squarespace. Look, if you're an entrepreneur looking to stand out online, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to help you do that. Whether you're starting out or expanding your brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place, all on your own terms. Look, picture this. You're a budding entrepreneur, you got a fantastic idea, and you want to launch your online presence, but you feel overwhelmed by the options out there. That's where Squarespace comes in. Squarespace will transform your online journey. First up, the new Squarespace Blueprint AI and SEO tools. With this guided design system, you can create a personalized website that fits your brand perfectly. Plus, the integrated SEO tools ensure you're easily discoverable, helping you reach more people faster. Now let's talk about flexible payments. Squarespace makes checkout absolutely seamless by accepting credit cards, PayPal, Apple Pay, and even now buy it now, pay later options like Afterpay and ClearPay in eligible countries. Plus, if you're into making content, they've got a courses feature. Squarespace gives you all the tools you need to create and sell your own courses online. You start with a professional layer, you upload your videos, you customize your course with the powerful Fluid Engine editor, and bada bing, bada boom, you're good to go. So if you're ready to take your online presence to the next level, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/brainfood. Use the code BRAINFOOD to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. You won't regret it. And now today's video. Of all belligerent nations in the Second World War, few were as creative and prolific in their pursuit of exotic weapons technology as the Third Reich. From jet aircraft to ballistic missiles, air-independent submarines, and infrared detection, German scientists and engineers pioneered many of the key technologies that would shape the course of late 20th century warfare. Yet despite their cleverness, none of these so-called Wunderwaffe, many of which we've already covered on this channel, did much to improve Germany's fortunes during the war. In many cases, this failure was due to political and economic factors rather than the skill of German designers. Chronically short of raw materials and manpower, and with its cities and factories being bombed round the clock by Allied air forces, Nazi Germany simply lacked the industrial capacity to produce even conventional weapons in sufficient quantities. Certain designs were also hamstrung by the limitations of existing technology. For example, despite being a marvel of engineering that would later pave the way for manned space travel, the A4 ballistic missile, better known as the V2, was too complex, expensive, unreliable, and inaccurate, and carried too small a warhead to be an effective weapon. It was also produced using slave labor under horrific conditions, making it the only weapon in history to kill more people in its manufacture than in actual combat. All of this was further exacerbated by the dysfunctional divide-and-conquer structure of the Nazi state, which pitted the various branches of the government and armed forces against each other in a bid to win the Führer's favor. This led to multiple groups simultaneously pursuing largely identical projects, resulting in massive duplication of effort and the further squandering of already scarce resources. And then there was the Führer himself, Adolf Hitler, whose wrong-headed and often delusional micromanaging crippled many a promising weapons project. For example, as previously covered in our video What Actually Defines an Assault Rifle and Who Invented Them, Hitler's interference significantly delayed the introduction of the STG-44 Sturmgewehr, the world's first modern assault rifle. He also greatly reduced the effectiveness of the Messerschmitt Me 262 Schwalbe, the world's first operational jet fighter, by insisting it be used as a bomber instead of an interceptor. On the other hand, many German Wunderwaffe failed because they were just really bad ideas. As we previously covered in our videos, the German rocket fighter that dissolved its pilots alive and the bizarre tale of the spontaneously exploding submarine, some designs were so horrifically hazardous to their operators that it's a wonder they even got off the drawing board. Still others were based on laughably outdated or ill-conceived ideas, with few weapons epitomizing the latter category, like the Messerschmitt Me 323 Gigant. Began as a far-sighted attempt to bring heavy-lift cargo capacity to the modern battlefield, the Me 232 project ended up producing one of the very worst aircrafts of the Second World War. And this is the story of Nazi Germany's aerial white elephants. In the spring of 1940, Germany stunned the world by launching some of history's first large-scale assaults by airborne troops. German paratroopers known as Fallschirmjäger were deployed during the invasions of Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands to capture bridges, crossroads, and other key objectives ahead of advancing ground troops. Yet despite their pioneering nature, they suffered from a number of tactical and equipment shortcomings which significantly hampered their effectiveness. For example, their standard parachute, the RZ-20, suspended its wearer from the small of their back instead of their shoulders, causing them to descend face down and land on their hands and knees. Not only did this result in parachutists being scattered widely over the drop zone, but it forced them to wear thick knee and elbow pads to avoid injury and limit the equipment they could carry. Indeed, most Fallschirmjäger jumped into combat carrying little more than a pistol and a small gravity knife used to cut away tangled parachute shrouds on landing. Rifles, machine guns, and other heavy equipment were dropped separately in special containers, forcing newly landed troops to spend the first few minutes of an assault scrambling around the battlefield looking for weapons and squandering the precious element of surprise. A far more effective tactic was to use assault gliders, which were towed into the air by transport aircraft and released near the target area. The standard German assault glider, the DFS-230, allowed 9 paratroopers, along with all their weapons and equipment, to be landed in a very small area, greatly increasing their combat effectiveness. Indeed, on May 10, 1940, the use of gliders allowed just 78 Fallschirmjäger to capture the seemingly impenetrable Belgian fortress of Eben-Mael in only 20 minutes. In the summer of 1940, the German armed forces turned their attention to Operation Sealion, the planned invasion of the British Isles. As the Allies would later learn the hard way, amphibious assaults are incredibly difficult to pull off, requiring true Herculean feats of logistics. Operation Sealion, however, would be a particular challenge. Having largely geared their war machine towards ground combat, the Germans had a relatively weak surface navy and lacked the ships necessary to carry their invasion force across the English Channel. Worse still, this fleet would have to contend with the might of the Royal Navy, at that time the most powerful in the world. As a result, the Germans planned to transport the majority of their troops to Britain by air, but this plan soon ran into 2 major roadblocks. First, the Luftwaffe lacked sufficient transport aircraft and assault gliders to carry all the invasion troops. Second, such an airborne invasion required the attainment of total air superiority, otherwise the Royal Air Force would cut the slow-moving transports and gliders to pieces. Unfortunately, the Luftwaffe's air campaign to destroy the RAF on the grounds, what has since become known as the Battle of Britain, ended in a British victory, and in September 1940, the High Command postponed Operation Sealion until the following spring. Not only did this postponement free up troops and other resources for Operation Barbarossa, the upcoming invasion of the Soviet Union, but it was hoped that it would allow for the development of specialized equipment to increase Sealion's chance of success. To this end, on October 18, 1940, the German Air Ministry, or RLM, issued a tender for the development of a Großraumlastenegler, or high-capacity assault glider. The specifications called for a truly enormous aircraft capable of carrying an unheard-of 20 tons of cargo, the equivalent of 100 fully equipped troops, a Panzer IV tank, or a towed 88mm anti-tank gun with its crew. Emphasizing the urgency of the project, prospective manufacturers were given only 14 days to submit their proposals. In the end, only 2 companies, Junkers and Messerschmitt, submitted their bids on time. The project was given the codename Project Warsaw, with the Junkers design being dubbed Warsaw East and Messerschmitt's Warsaw West. First out of the gate was Junkers with their Ju-322 Mammoth, or Mammoth, measuring a whopping 62 meters wide and 30 feet long. The Mammoth was a strange-looking beast, effectively a giant flying wing, its tail unit appearing comically small in comparison. The 11 by 14 meter cargo bay in the center of the span featured a drop-down ramp to allow troops, vehicles, and cargo to be easily unloaded, while the pilot's cockpit was offset to port to clear the cargo bay and maximize capacity. While being towed into the air, the Mammoth rolled on an 8,000-kilogram wheeled trolley, which was jettisoned immediately after takeoff. Upon reaching the target, the glider landed on a set of sprung skids. Finally, for self-defense, the Mammoth was armed with 3 MG-15 machine guns mounted in turrets on either side of the cargo bay and at the front of the tail unit. Yet despite these impressive specifications, right from the start, the Ju-322 project was plagued with difficulties. Most of these stemmed from the RLM's insistence that the Ju-322 be built as much as possible from non-strategic materials, namely wood. Junkers, which had pioneered the construction of all-metal aircraft, had very little experience working with wood. Worse still, when the lumber for the first 100 Ju-322 was delivered, much of it turned out to be rotten or otherwise defective. Indeed, while the main spar was designed with a safety factor of 1.8, when the first prototype was load tested, it failed at only 90% of the design value. Later, during cargo loading tests, a Panzer VI tank pitched forward off the loading ramp and crashed right through the floor of the cargo bay. Reinforcing the floor, along with other modifications, resulted in the cargo capacity being reduced time and time again. By the time the first prototype rolled out of Junkers' factory at Merseburg, it could only carry around 12 tons, a little over half of the RLM's original specifications. And all the while, the supposedly top-secret project was being closely followed by Allied intelligence, who learned so much about about it that in March 1941, the BBC broadcast a news report on the so-called Merseburg Giant. And then there was the unusual design of the aircraft, which many feared was aerodynamically unsound. Indeed, upon first laying eyes on the Mammoth, General Oberst Ernst Udet, head of research and development for the Luftwaffe, declared, "This aircraft will never fly. The proportions of the empennage are wrong. The machine will never be stable." Udet's suspicions were soon confirmed when on March 12, 1941, the first Ju-322 prototype prepared to make its maiden flight. Despite the Mammoth being unloaded, the four-engine Junkers Ju-90 towplane, one of the largest transports in the Luftwaffe's arsenal, struggled to gain sufficient airspeed, using up the entire runway in the process. Finally, the giant glider lifted from the runway, only to rise above the towplane, lifting up its tail and threatening to crash it. Thinking quickly, test pilot Hans Hasselbach released the tow cable, allowing the towplane to land safely. As for the Mammoth, it was so unstable and its massive control surfaces so heavy that Hasselbach struggled to control it, only barely managing to set it down in a nearby field. Due to the glider's enormous size, it took 2 weeks to tow it back to the airfield using tanks. Subsequent flight tests with the second prototype revealed further major problems, such as the wheeled dolly bouncing so high it threatened to destroy the glider. Finally, in May 1941, the RLM deemed the design unworkable and cancelled the project. The lumber for the remaining 98 airframes was cut up and used as fuel for wood-powered vehicles. All told, the disastrous Ju-322 project had cost 45 million Reichsmarks, or around $380 million in today's money. With Junkers out of the race, the contract for the Grossraum Lastensegler passed to Messerschmitt and their Me-321 Gigant, or Giant. Smaller and more conventional than the Junkers Mammoth, the Gigant was built of steel tubing and wood covered in fabric, weighed 35 tons, fully loaded, and measured 28 meters long with a wingspan of 55 meters. However, it could carry a full 23 tons of cargo, 3 more than the RLM specification in its cavernous 11 by 3 by 3.4 meter cargo hold. This space was designed to match the dimensions of a standard German railway flat car, meaning anything that could travel by rail could travel by Me-321, and was accessed via a pair of large clamshell doors in the hose, an innovation that would see widespread use in many post-war transport aircraft. Like the Mammoth, the Gigant took off on a wheeled dolly that was jettisoned shortly after liftoff, with the glider landing on a set of extendable skids. Self-defense was provided by 2 to 4 machine guns mounted in positions atop the wing. The prototype Me-321 made its maiden flight at Leipheim on February 25, 1941, with test pilot Karl Bauer at the controls. Though the aircraft was loaded with only 3 tons of ballast, the Junker Ju-90 towplane struggled to lift it into the air. Once airborne, Bauer found the controls heavy and sluggish, but managed to make a safe, controlled landing. Based on this experience, the cockpit was enlarged to fit a co-pilot and radio operator, and electric servo motors were fitted to the control surfaces. A braking parachute was also added to reduce the glider's landing distance. As the Ju-90 had proved inadequate, Messerschmitt decided to tow the Gigant using 3 Bf-110 heavy fighters connected to the same tow cable. For additional thrust, the glider was also fitted with a number of Walter HWK 109500 Starhilfe rocket-assisted takeoff, or RATO pods, mounted under the wings. Known as Troika Schlepp, this scheme proved exactly as dangerous as it sounds, requiring near superhuman concentration and flying skills on the parts of the towplane pilots. On May 28, 1941, a test flight carrying a full load of 100 soldiers ended in disaster when some of the rocket pods failed to ignite, causing the Gigant to slew to one side and the towplanes to collide with each other. The resulting crash resulted in 129 deaths, the deadliest aviation accident in history until the New York mid-air collision of December 16, 1960. In the wake of this crash, Messerschmitt began looking for an alternative to the Troika system. The solution came in the form of the bizarre Heinkel HE 111Z Zwilling, or twin, effectively 2 Heinkel HE 111 light bombers joined together at the wing with a 5th engine added. By the summer of 1941, Operation Sealion, the mission for which the Me-321 was designed, had been postponed indefinitely, so the giant gliders were formed into 3 Luftwaffe transport squadrons and sent to Russia in support of Operation Barbarossa. As few airborne assaults were carried out on the Eastern Front, the Gigants were mainly used to carry heavy cargo to forward airfields. They proved less effective than hoped, but the primitive conditions at these airfields made the giant gliders difficult to land and maneuver on the ground. In early 1942, the Gigants were withdrawn from the Eastern Front and sent to the Mediterranean in anticipation of Operation Hercules, the planned airborne invasion of the island of Malta. However, in May of that year, the Germans launched Operation Mercury, the airborne invasion of Crete. The largest invasion ever conducted purely from the air, Mercury proved a Pyrrhic victory, with the lightly armed Fallschirmjäger suffering horrific casualties at the hands of Cretan defenders. This near disaster convinced the German High Command that Hercules would meet a similar fate, and the operation was cancelled. But even if the invasion had gone ahead, a chronic shortage of tow planes would likely have prevented the Gigantes from participating. Instead, the gliders were sent back to Russia in an attempt to resupply the encircled German 6th Army at Stalingrad. But by the time they arrived, there were no longer any German-held airfields in range of Stalingrad, so the plan was abandoned and the remaining Gigantes sent back to Germany. By this time, it had become apparent that the giant assault glider was an outdated concept, no longer suited to Germany's current strategic situation. Consequently, Messerschmitt set about converting the Me-321 into a self-propelled cargo transport. As nearly all German-made engines were earmarked for other projects, Messerschmitt selected the French Gnome Rhone 14N 1,140 horsepower radial, hundreds of which had been captured during the 1940 invasion of France. The first prototype, designated the Me-321C, was fitted with 4 engines, but this was soon increased to 6. The final version, redesignated the Me-323, could carry 2 more tons of cargo than the Me-321. However, the 6 engines increased the aircraft's gross rate by more than 25% and gave it a lumbering top speed of only 283 km per hour, less than half the speed of most Allied fighters. It was also just as exhausting and sluggish to control as its unpowered predecessor. Nonetheless, 201 Me-323s were produced between 1942 and 1944, with some being converted from Me-321 gliders and others being built from scratch. Several different versions were produced, including the E1, which added 2 turrets armed with 20mm cannons for added defense, the E2, which featured more streamlined turrets and more powerful Junkers Jumo 211R engines, and the E2WT, which added yet another defensive turret in the aircraft's nose. In the spring of 1943, 2 squadrons of 16 Gigantes each were sent to the Mediterranean to support Germany's faltering North African campaign. The German Afrika Korps under General Erwin Rommel, aka the Desert Fox, had been in retreat since their defeat at the Second Battle of El Alamein in November 1942. Trapped in Tunisia by the Allied forces, they were quickly running out of ammunition, food, medicine, and other supplies. The German Kriegsmarine had attempted to resupply Rommel by sea, but most of its transport ships had been sent to the bottom by Allied aircraft based in Malta. The German High Command hoped that the Gigantes, with their enormous cargo capacity, could break the blockade by creating an air bridge between Italy and Tunisia. But the Mediterranean was not the Eastern Front where the Germans had enjoyed air superiority, and the lumbering, heavily laden Gigantes proved to be sitting ducks against the marauding fighters of the Royal Air Force. On April the 22nd, 1943, 16 Me-223s of Transport Geschwader 5 were approaching Cape Bon in Tunisia when they were jumped by 7 squadrons of RAF Supermarine Spitfires and South African Air Force Curtiss P-40 Kitty Hawks. Within minutes, all but 2 of the Gigantes were shot out of the sky, sending 120 German airmen to their deaths. In the wake of this disaster, the Gigantes were withdrawn from the Mediterranean and sent once more to the Eastern Front, where they finally proved their worth, resupplying the Cuban bridgehead on the Taman Peninsula. Operating from airfields at Bagarowo, Krasnodar, and Timanshenskaya, Slavenskaya, the Me-323s and their HE-111Z tow planes flew badly needed supplies to forward troop positions, carrying wounded troops to rear-line hospitals on the return flights. The last of these supply missions was flown in April 1944, whereupon the remaining Me-323s were withdrawn from service and scrapped. No complete examples survive today, though a complete wreck was discovered in 2012 off the coast of Sardinia, lying in 60 meters of water. Thus ended the tragicomic saga of the Gigant, an aircraft that was obsolete before it even flew, and despite the best efforts of its designers, never managed to become much more than a lumbering death trap. Yet for all its failings, near the end of its rocky career, the Gigant briefly succeeded in demonstrating the value of heavy airlift capability on the modern battlefield. Today, such capability is vital to global military operations and is capably provided by such legendary aircraft as the Anatov AN-124 Ruslan, Boeing C-17 Globemaster III, and the Lockheed C-5 Galaxy.